The room was filled with bright lights and cameras. A well-known reporter sat across from Clint Eastwood, ready for the interview. She had a confident smile, her eyes filled with curiosity, but also something else, amusement. As the cameras rolled, she leaned forward and asked, "Clint, you've had quite the career. You started in TV, did a few cowboy movies, and now you direct. Quite the transition." She chuckled softly, shaking her head. The laughter wasn't loud, but it was there. A quiet, dismissive kind of laugh. The kind that suggested she didn't take his journey seriously. Clint, sitting calmly in his chair, didn't flinch. He didn't react. His face remained steady, unreadable. The years had given him a presence that was both quiet and powerful. He had heard comments like this before. The reporter continued, her voice light but teasing. "Did you ever think you'd actually be taken seriously as a director? I mean, from playing a cowboy to winning awards. That's quite a leap." She laughed again, as if the idea of Clint Eastwood being more than just a cowboy was amusing. The room was silent except for her laughter. The crew shifted slightly, sensing the tension. Some of them knew Clint's history. Others were waiting to see how he would respond. But Clint didn't rush. He didn't jump in to defend himself. Instead, he sat back, watching the reporter with eyes that had seen decades of Hollywood. Then, in a voice as steady as ever, he said his next words that would leave her completely silent. Clint Eastwood wasn't always a Hollywood legend. Before fame, before fortune, he was just another young man trying to make it in the industry. And it wasn't easy. In the early 1950s, Clint arrived in Los Angeles with big dreams, but no real connections. He took odd jobs to support himself, doing everything from digging swimming pools to working as a lumberjack. Acting wasn't even a sure thing for him yet. He just knew he wanted more than a regular job. When he finally started auditioning, he quickly realized Hollywood wasn't welcoming to just anyone. Casting directors dismissed him for the way he talked, too slow, too stiff. Some said his Adam's apple was too big, his facial expressions too rigid. Even his height, an impressive 6'4", worked against him. He looked different from the leading men of the time, and that made it harder for him to fit in. Still, Clint didn't quit. He studied acting, took advice where he could, and kept showing up. Eventually, he landed a contract with Universal Studios. But even then, things weren't promising. The studio put him in small, forgettable roles. He played a lab assistant, a jet pilot, a soldier, always in the background, never the star. Then in 1959, his first real opportunity came. He was cast as Rowdy Yates in Rawhide, a TV western. It wasn't the biggest show on television, but it gave him steady work. He played the young, impulsive cowboy alongside more experienced actors. The role taught him discipline. It made him familiar to audiences. But it wasn't the kind of part that turned someone into a legend. At that time, no one saw Clint Eastwood as a future Hollywood great. He was just another actor in a western. Nothing more. Or so they thought. By the early 1960s, Rawhide had made Clint Eastwood a familiar face, but he was still far from being a star. He was stuck playing the same kind of role, a clean-cut cowboy who followed orders. He wanted something different, something bigger. Then, an unusual opportunity came his way. An Italian director named Sergio Leone was making a western. It wasn't a Hollywood production. It was low-budget, shot in Spain, and had no major stars. The movie was called A Fistful of Dollars. Clint wasn't the first choice for the lead role. Other actors turned it down, but when the offer came to him, he saw potential. The script was different. The main character, the man with no name, wasn't a typical hero. He was rough, quiet, and unpredictable. Hollywood didn't take Italian westerns seriously, but Clint took a chance. He traveled to Spain, worked with a mostly foreign crew, and helped create a new kind of cowboy, one who didn't say much, but carried a powerful presence. When A Fistful of Dollars was released, critics ignored it, but audiences loved it. The film made huge profits in Europe, leading to 2 sequels, For a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. By the time the trilogy ended, Clint Eastwood was no longer just a TV actor. He was a movie star. But back in Hollywood, some still didn't respect his work. They called his films cheap and violent. Some dismissed them as foreign knockoffs of real westerns. Clint didn't argue. He didn't need to. He had made his mark. The silent, rugged gunslinger he played in Leone's films would define a new era of westerns. and he was just getting started. By the late 1960s, Clint Eastwood was a full-fledged movie star. The Dollars trilogy had made him famous worldwide, but in Hollywood he was still seen as just an action star, a tough guy with a gun. He knew if he wanted real respect, he had to do more. That's when he set his sights on directing. Hollywood didn't take actors-turned-directors seriously. Studios controlled everything, and few believed Clint had what it took. He wasn't a trained filmmaker. He hadn't gone to film school. To many, the idea of a cowboy actor directing movies seemed like a joke. But Clint didn't care. He had spent years watching directors work. He had studied how films were made. He knew what he wanted. So in 1971 he made his move. His first film as a director was Play Misty for Me. It was completely different from the westerns he was known for. A psychological thriller about a radio DJ being stalked by a fan. It was tense, eerie, and nothing like the action movies people expected from him. When it was released, critics were shocked. Clint didn't just direct it well, he showed a deep understanding of storytelling. The film was a hit. Suddenly, people realized he wasn't just an actor. He had a director's eye. But even then, some doubted him. They thought Play Misty for Me was a fluke. Maybe he got lucky, maybe he couldn't do it again. Clint ignored the noise and kept going. He directed westerns like High Plains Drifter and The Outlaw Josie Wales, proving he could handle the genre that made him famous. Then, he started branching out. Crime dramas, war films, even romance. He wasn't just taking roles, he was shaping them. Yet, despite his growing success, some still dismissed him. They saw him as the quiet cowboy trying too hard, trying to be more than he was. But Clint never needed their approval. He let his work do the talking. And soon, Hollywood would have no choice but to listen. The reporter leaned back in her chair, her smirk still visible. She had just laughed at Clint Eastwood's career, his journey from a TV cowboy to an award-winning director. To her, it seemed amusing. Unbelievable, even. Clint, sitting across from her, remained calm. His expression didn't change. He had been in Hollywood long enough to recognize that tone, the quiet mockery, the doubt disguised curiosity. It wasn't the first time someone questioned his career. It wouldn't be the last. He let the silence hang for a moment. The crew in the room shifted uncomfortably, waiting to see how he would respond. Then, in his usual steady voice, he spoke. "You know," he said, "I've heard things like this before." The reporter raised an eyebrow, still smiling. "Oh?" Clint nodded. "Back when I started, people told me I wouldn't make it, said my voice was too slow, my acting too stiff, said I didn't fit the Hollywood mold." The reporter chuckled, as if proving her point. "Well, I mean..." Clint didn't let her finish. His voice was calm, but firm. "They told me I wasn't a real actor when I did Rawhide. Then when I made westerns in Italy, they called them cheap. Critics laughed at those movies. But those same films changed the way westerns were made." The smirk on the reporter's face faded slightly. Clint continued, "When I wanted to direct, people told me to stay in my lane, that actors shouldn't try to be filmmakers, said I wouldn't be taken seriously. Then I made Play Misty for Me, and after that, I made Unforgiven, $1 Million Baby, Mystic River." He leaned in slightly, his voice never rising, but carrying weight. "Those movies won Academy Awards." The reporter's face changed. She looked uncomfortable now, shifting in her seat. The confidence in her eyes wavered. Clint sat back again, relaxed. "I've been hearing the same thing for decades. People laugh, they doubt, they assume I don't know what I'm doing." He paused. "But I just keep working. And eventually, they stop laughing." Silence filled the room. The crew, who had been watching closely, exchanged glances. No one spoke. The reporter, who had started the interview with a teasing tone, suddenly had nothing to say. She opened her mouth slightly, as if searching for a response. But none came. Clint simply gave her a small nod, as if to say, "Now you understand." And with that, the interview moved on, but the air in the room had shifted. The laughter was gone, and so was the doubt. The interview continued, but the energy in the room had changed. The reporter, who had laughed at Clint Eastwood's career, now sat in silence. She had nothing more to say about his unbelievable journey. Because now, she understood. Clint Eastwood wasn't just an actor. He wasn't just a director. He was a symbol of resilience, of quiet determination. For over 6 decades he had shaped Hollywood. From his early days in Rawhide to his legendary roles in spaghetti westerns. from the action-packed Dirty Harry films to his deeply moving dramas. He had done what few ever could. Reinvented himself, again and again. At first, he was the cowboy, the man with no name, the rugged drifter who spoke with his eyes more than his words. Then he became the cop. Harry Callahan. Tough, fearless, and unshaken. A role that defined a generation of action films. And then, he proved them all wrong. He stepped behind the camera and became one of the greatest directors of his time. He told stories that mattered. Stories about redemption, loss, and human nature. Movies like Unforgiven, which won Best Picture and Best Director. A film that deconstructed the Western genre, the very thing that made him famous. Movies like $1 Million Baby, which won another Best Picture Oscar. A film that was raw, emotional, and completely different from the action-packed films he was once known for. Even in his later years, Clint never slowed down. He kept making movies. Gran Torino, American Sniper, The Mule, each one different. Each one proving that he was more than just an actor or a director, he was a storyteller. Hollywood had doubted him at every stage of his career. First, they said he wouldn't make it as an actor. Then, they said his westerns were a fluke. Later, they dismissed his directing career as a side project, but Clint never argued. He never tried to prove anything with words. He just kept working. And in the end, the awards, the respect, the legacy, those things spoke for themselves. As the interview wrapped up, the reporter finally spoke. But this time, there was no teasing in her voice, no laughter, only respect. She looked at Clint and simply said, "I guess you proved them all wrong." Clint gave a small smile, a knowing look. Then, in his usual calm tone, he said, "Yeah, I guess I did." The camera's red light flickered off. The interview was over. But the weight of his words lingered. Because Clint Eastwood wasn't just a cowboy, wasn't just a cop, wasn't just a director. He was a legend.